It's 4 o'clock right up.
Call our meeting to order. Can I get a roll call, please?
Okay, Richard Seiler,
Present.
Joe Mann,
Present.
Dale Robbins,
Present.
DG Garcia.
Muted, DG. DG is on Zoom. Yeah, DG, can you unmute yourself, please?
Tim Olson,
Present.
Jim Bonker,
Present.
Paul Brown, and Kimball Big Horse.
Present.
Okay, very good. Don't see, does Paul have an excuse?
I did not know that he was not on here, so.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's look at the agenda and we'll look at approving the minutes. The workshops today are going to be on public utility distribution facility as a limited use. We will do that. Fencing standards for the.
Hold on. Let me try. Turn this volume up because I cannot hear.
I'm sorry. Okay, community events, temporary use permits, Amy. Then we'll look at the security report, any planning commissioner reports, and any citizen comments. We will adjourn. Let's first look at our meeting minutes for May 10th. It is. Is it not? Is it not good? It is good. Okay, for May 10th, does anyone have any comments or changes they'd like to see with the minutes?
No.
Move to approve. Second. All in favor of approving the minutes for the May 10th meeting is.
I had a question actually.
Aye.
I
Opposed?
have a question.
Can I speak?
And so. Question. Was there a question?
I raised my hand and
Okay.
Zoom.
Okay, fair enough.
May I ask, Lisa?
Yes.
On the minutes, I thought there was a proposal to change zoning. That wasn't exactly clear in the minutes. What was the proposed change exactly?
So we had a workshop on the on Greenstone's River District open space, that's proposed zone change. And also, they also talked about landscaping and sign code amendments.
I think some certain places were zoned residential and they're proposing to change those to open space. Am I remembering that right?
You are remembering that correctly, and that is what the proposal is. They're already technically HOA owned areas, and so it tracks, well, so they're already open space, but proposing to change the zoning and have different zoning regulations for that open space was the basis for their comp plan, their proposed comp plan and zone change amendment.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I'll just make a note for the minutes that Paul Brown joined us at 4:04.
Because there was a pace car in front of me and I couldn't speak. Wasn't my fault.
You can still speak.
Do you realize that we're
The
recording
dog
this
is
meeting?
Noted.
But you're so
close, I thought you walked here.
Yeah.
Well, it's because you're in much better shape than I am.
Okay, Lisa.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kick it off with a discussion of public utilities, local distribution facilities as a limited use. And just to give you a little background. So the definition of a public utility local distribution facility is any building, structure, or device which transfers directly to the public the service or supply by a public utility, including telephone, electric, less than 60 feet in height, gas, cable television, water and sewer, and other facilities, equipment, and structures necessary for conducting a local distribution service by a government or public utility. Now, keep in mind, we do also have franchise agreements for those which run in our right of way, so that we do also have some additional regulations associated with that. But this is just the process of when a new one comes in. And so, on our current code requirements treat all of these, local, distribution facilities as a conditional use. And so, as such, the way the code reads, and it reads this way in every zone except for open space. Open space is the one zone where it's not allowed. It has specific requirements for the conditional uses. One, that the utility company shall secure the necessary property or right of way to assure for the proper construction, maintenance, and general safety of properties abutting the public utility and local distribution facility. That's one standard, and the use shall be subject to restrictions and conditions as may be imposed by the hearing examiner. So what as a conditional use, what it requires is a hearing before the hearing examiner. So it's much more costly for the applicant, it's much more time consuming for staff, much less timely decision process, and ultimately the taxpayers and utility customers are the ones who are paying for the additional costs. And at the end of the day, any condition imposed by the hearing examiner needs to be premised on city code standards and policy and or mitigation of negative impacts. Now, we're proposing that we're trying to kill the axe on our, or to put the fly on our forehead with an axe, and that we can achieve the same results by shifting to limited use, much more timely process, much simpler process, but the outcome is going to be exactly the same. So as a limited use, there'd be no public hearing required. It would be less costly, more efficient process. It is still subject to SEPA, so the public does have the opportunity to comment and identify impacts and potential mitigations. And still, any conditions imposed need to be premised on city code standards and policies and or mitigation of negative impacts. So the same rules apply for limited use that applies to the hearing examiner. We just have a whole lot of extra process associated with getting to that answer. So, so what we're proposing is to change for all these zones. This is in the zoning matrix. They're all listed as conditional uses, and we want to switch it to identify them as limited use. And then, and so that was for the development code. We do the same thing in the river district for public utility facilities in the river district zoning matrix. We would also propose new limited use standards and conditions. So this is the proposed language. So some of it comes from what's in the conditional use permit, but we add a little bit of additional language. The utility shall secure the necessary property or right of way to assure for the proper construction, maintenance, and general safety of the properties abutting the public utility local distribution facility, same as what it is in conditional use. The utility shall comply with all landscaping and screening requirements as detailed in City Development Code 10.3C, unless a valid public safety and security reason for not installing said landscaping can be demonstrated by the utility. So, and I throw this in there because I have for like electric substations and whatnot, there are some setback requirements associated with how close the trees can be to that. And if there is a public safety basis for that. So I want to make sure that we're addressing that. There's other landscaping that could be required, but we wouldn't necessarily have the same standard that we otherwise would for trees, et cetera. And I think that's an important consideration also. And lastly, the utility shall implement all mitigation measures as may be identified through the secret review for the project as a condition of permit. So that's belt and suspenders. It already exists. We're just calling it out so that people understand that they still have due process in this. So, and then the other thing that we would have to do in each of the zone chapters, so limited uses are, paragraph, 10 to whatever the zone is. 3 and conditional uses are in 10 to whatever the zoning district is 4. And they list the requirements. So we would also be deleting the portion where we have the standards for public utility local distribution facility from those chapters. It's a pretty simple, clean, elegant fix. It achieves the same thing, but it's a much more efficient way to achieve it. So this is a staff initiated proposal. We just went through this with the water tank. And we spent a lot of time working on the staff report, the public hearing, waiting for the hearing commissioner or the hearing examiner to give us the decision. And there was a lot of time and money associated with that process. Whereas this is a simpler, cleaner process. And the outcome's exactly the same. The hearing examiner implemented conditions that were proposed by staff based upon code standards, policies, and mitigation measures as identified in the civil process. So the outcome literally would be virtually the same. Yes.
Would other municipalities handle it as a limited use or a conditional use? Do you know?
Some do, some don't. It
Yeah.
depends. It does depend. We use limited use pretty consistently, and we have, as a city, we have gone to move more things into the limited use category for exactly the reasons that I stated. And I'm not a big fan of the conditional use permit myself, the process. I understand it for really impactful sightings. You're citing a sewage treatment plant, you're citing a jail, you're citing those types of facilities. There's good reason to give the community a good voice for what's being considered. But for some of these more limited types of, so I dare say that if you need a water tank so that you have adequate fire protection for your neighborhood, you're not going to be opposed to having a water tank. If we need an electric substation to provide adequate service to part of our community, we're going to want to see that happen. These are essential public utility services. So anyhow.
Okay.
So that's kind of the basis. Any questions, any discussion on that?
Yes, I just have one question. Underneath this table, you have a 3, A, and B.
So
Are
that,
those supposed to be there or those?
no,
get
those, I
lined
know,
up?
those are gone. Those are gone now. I saw that when I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. I saw
Okay.
that when I went in there to create the presentation. I'm like, how did that get there?
Okay, I did.
It's a vestige of something else. I'm not sure.
Well, it looks like it should be lined out like it is in group 4.
It's not,
in
it shouldn't even be
paragraph
there. It
4.
just, I think I
Okay.
copied, something got copied where it shouldn't have gotten copied.
Okay,
So my apologies on that, but it'll be cleaned up the next time you see this.
okay.
All right, and so on to the next one. The next one are fencing standards for essential public facilities and utilities. And so, so basically I want to pause for a second. So essential public facilities would include things like sewage treatment facilities, wells, water towers, lift stations, electrical substations, distribution, transmission facilities, and other critical public infrastructure. The issue is that 9/11 changed our perspective on homeland security, and one of the things that has been a big focus of our protection of public facilities and utilities has been the fact that these can be targets for terrorist actions, and we've actually even seen people now taking shots at distribution facilities for electricity and whatnot. It's a good, one of the other targets that we saw as we started looking at tightening up our homeland security after the Twin Towers came down, with things like how do we protect our public water supply? How do we, and again, sewage treatment plants tend to have chlorine and other chemicals that could significantly impact the community if they were to come under attack. So bottom line is this: we were approached by the Liberty Lake Water and Sewer District because they have some of those facilities. Our code specifically does not allow for barbed wire, razor wire, and chain link fences, okay? Period. In the development code, there's a few additional exceptions in the River District. But the bottom line is that we cannot allow it at all. However, as you saw from the picture that was at the beginning of this, and I'm gonna show it to you again, this is some standard security fencing with the barbed wire at the top and whatnot. We have heard this before from other entities, not necessarily public utilities and facilities. We heard it when Western States Cat was coming in, et cetera. This can be a challenge. We do allow electric fencing. We don't have a prohibition against electric fencing, but that's expensive for some of these larger facilities. We have a number of these facilities that are already have chain link and barbed wire that were grandfathered, that were vested before the city incorporated. Amy does not like the term grandfathered.
We all knew what you meant.
And I'm sorry if I offended any of the grandfathers in the room when I said that. Be that as it may, so we're proposing that a simple and elegant solution would be simply that these prohibitions do not apply to essential public facilities and utilities, including but not limited to sewage treatment facilities, wells, water towers, lift stations, electrical substations, distribution and transmission facilities, and other critical public infrastructure. Simple and elegant solution. And we have to do the same in the River District, but as I said, River District is a little bit more complicated. So they do allow chain link fences in some zones and, or under certain conditions. But at the end of the day, the fix is exactly the same. To add this language that those prohibitions don't apply specifically to essential public facilities.
How about
Yes.
cell towers?
So, yeah, so they would fall within that, so they would fall within the telecommunications. They would fit into the definition of this, so yeah. And we could be explicit if we needed to be. It doesn't say cell tower, but the definition section does, I believe, include cell towers.
Okay.
Okay, so what is a lift station? Switch.
So it's a pump station.
Okay.
So for water, they usually refer to it as a pump station. For sewer, they refer to it as a lift station. Don't ask me why.
That's fine, I just didn't know what the term meant, thank you. Sure. Do you want to be explicit with natural gas?
We could be explicit with both natural gas and cell if you would like to see that.
Yeah,
it feels like it's probably for clarity.
just because we list so many other, utilities.
Yes. Yes.
And this is just me, but do we call it sewage or wastewater?
So,
Because our treatment is wastewater treatment,
so,
generally because it collects surface runoff also.
so it's interesting because I think that so you are correct, we do generally refer to it as wastewater. But I think the expression is a sewage treatment facility as opposed to a wastewater treatment facility. But
Okay.
that's how I've always heard it, so.
I've always heard it as wastewater. That's,
To change
so I would,
wastewater if you feel better about that.
that's the way I think is the standard. I could be wrong, but I think the slang is more sewage, I think.
Sewage and wastewater treatment cover everything.
Well, wastewater is.
Wastewater
is the
actually
one
does
that
cover
covers
everything.
everything. Sewage is a little bit less, because it doesn't include the runoffs and stuff.
And so, question I have is, this is as a result of what we've seen happen in the country based off 9/11 and modern events, because I'm trying to figure out, as I sit here for both these proposals, is what are the unintended consequences, and why was this done from the beginning?
Because it was, and I believe because, so I'm projecting here, I believe because at the time that we developed our code originally, we were not as attuned to that homeland security perspective. And we really began talking about protecting our public water supplies and protecting our communities from these places where they have large chemicals that have the potential to impact them a lot more seriously after 9/11, when we realized that there are bad guys out there that may, even if we follow all the safety protocols in the world, there are bad guys out there that may want to use that to inflict harm on the community.
I always look at it as, like, power stations, the reason we fence them is for safety of the general population, right? For kids and stuff, where now we have to worry about the vandals and terrorist type environment in our world.
And the impact when a random thug decides to do damage to a public utility, the impact is on the entire community.
Businesses and residents, I can see that.
The other one I think of is traffic control, and I don't know if we have that where people can get to it, but I know that is a concern in major cities, because it can tie up the cities moving the traffic. I'm not sure if every lake cares, but that'd be another one that could be included here if it is a concern.
Well, I'm not sure.
Like your stoplight systems and your brains of your traffic control system. Some bigger cities
Yes, they have.
have centers that run those things, and they don't want to lose that.
So we are going to
I
smart signals. We are going to smart signals, however, we're using wash dots. We're using wash dots ratings. So we're going to be using radio technology that relays between the signals. And then it goes down underground at Liberty Lake and Apple Way. Where, and it goes to an underground data network that is, I think it's someplace in the valley, I don't even know exactly where it is, but that's all the conversations we had about creating this smart signal network. So we don't have to worry about it here.
We're not that big of a city to concern ourselves.
I think it's a rather important thing. When we were going through the Liberty Lake Academy, my wife and I, Vista was one of the presenters, and they have a security department now they didn't have 10 years ago. And that's really become a really big issue for them, is how they can harden sites to keep people from shooting them, which is a very difficult thing to work with. And so I think anything we can do to help protect those things, because it's not just terrorists anymore, it is vandals, it is a single person with a grudge. It doesn't require, major planning. And so I think anything we can do to help harden these sites is gonna be a huge plus.
Absolutely. So this is, what, we think it's really as simple of a fix as this, just give the utilities the ability to do what they need to do to protect their infrastructure. Let's not restrict them in a way that makes it more complicated. Questions, comments?
The only thing, and it's probably not as related to this change that we're looking at here, Lisa, but when I was reading it, dimensions, the paragraph B above talks about allowable height for residential. And then it talks about building permits for anything over 6 feet. We don't, when I was reading that, trying to find the allowable height for non-residential fences. And they don't exist in what was presented here, so is that a omission or is that
No,
purpose?
no, it's not an omission. You don't have a limit on the height of fences. The limiting factor for fences is the engineering structural integrity. And the reason why we require a building permit above 6 feet is because it's now got to be stamped by an engineer, and it's got to be, they've got to provide enough information that we know that it's going to be structurally sound. Less than one is for fences falling something.
And so the way this is written, that 6 foot is for residential fences only. Okay. And anything else gets a permit?
Has to get a permit. Most
If it
people, because of the cost prohibition of going higher, people really don't go higher unless they really need that security.
So I guess there's probably a wall
I guess my question is, do we get rid of residential in paragraph 1?
No, because I don't think,
Because I think what you just said is anything above 6 feet needs a building permit.
yeah, but I don't think that, I think that the point is that there's no, that,
So we're not saying anything else is limited to 6 feet.
yeah, we're not, not seeing where it's.
B1, the first line says residential.
Allowable height of residential fences and walls is 6 feet. Yeah, because in a commercial setting, you may need a more than 6 foot fence. But, again, that's just a
So the-
consideration of residential zones.
So the building permit applies to non-residential area.
A building permit is required for fences and walls exceeding 6 feet in height. We're just saying that residential fences cannot exceed 6 feet in height.
Okay,
So it covers both.
okay.
Amy, you're up.
Maybe I'll advance the slides.
I will.
Alright. So we're gonna talk about, special event permits and the process and some updates that staff has in mind. So after working on this for several months, I can confidently say that this process is an outcome of incremental changes resulting in unintended consequences.
I'm sorry, is there a handout for this one?
No, there's not.
Okay.
We're still talking conceptual about it.
Fine.
I'm gonna use this time to pretty much describe the problem and kind of outline the scope of what we're looking at, and then hopefully by the next workshop, I'll have some vetted solutions for you guys to give us feedback on and really consider. But right now, it's more just kind of, I wanna give everybody a big picture look at all of the changes that are kind of associated with this. So this project is really hoping to streamline and clarify the process for staff and for applicants, because right now we kind of have special event language sprinkled in all these different areas because of all of these kind of incremental changes. And so what we'd like to do is just get everything, everything in one spot and a very clear focused process moving forward. So this is kind of the summary of all the changes that we're gonna make, and I'm gonna go through all of these individually, but the ones that are bolded are the ones that are gonna be really under the purview of this body and are really the ones that we're gonna be asking you guys to kind of give us feedback on as those are the ones that result in changes to the development code. But the other pieces are part of it, so I wanted everybody to kind of have all the different pieces. So the first one is definitions. Seasonal and special events is an interesting term because that is the most commonly used term in our code for these types of activities, but it's not defined. So there's no definition telling us what's a seasonal and special event. However, community event is defined. And it's another term that's used throughout the code. It is codified, but it's got some challenges in that, well, the first one is that they are defined as a special event, generally recognized by the community and advertised as such, which when you're trying to decide if something needs a permit or not, that's a very difficult thing to measure. How are we, is it generally recognized? So then as you go on, it's got a lot of very specific examples of events, but it misses some of our more general types of events like grand openings, things like that. That are not included in the definition. But so what I would like to do is use this opportunity, use the definition as an opportunity to make it clear that the lines of when we are going to require a permit and when we won't require a permit are going to be based really on two factors. Is it open to the general public? Is it just, everybody come and enjoy this thing? Or is there a reasonable expectation that there will be significant demands on public services? So is it gonna use the streets? Is it gonna use our parks? Is there a reasonable expectation that there would be a demand on fire and police services? Right now, the current acting definition, we kind of interpret it to mean that it's only on public property, but we do have an interest in what's going on private property, if it's going to impact the right of way, or if it could result in a high call for services. So I want to make sure that we clean that definition up to be very clear about when a permit will or will not be required. Public assembly is another interesting code provision. We kind of included it in this suite of changes because it shows up in all the places that community events show up. There's nothing objectively wrong with the definition of public assembly. The problem with the definition is that last sentence where it says a public assembly permit must be obtained prior to holding the public assembly. That gets very close to infringing on certain rights that are protected by our First Amendment. And I can give you a good example. We recently had some community members organize a protest and a march to City Hall based on an item that was on the City Council's agenda. For us to have regulated that based on a permit requirement would have been not good. And so most of the negative impacts that would happen from a public assembly would be handled by our police department in the moment. So it's really just the removing of a prior permit is what we're looking to do with that particular case.
And can I just jump in
Yes.
there for a second? One point that I'd like to point out is what's crazy about the particular requirement here is that most of the places that these type of activities occur are actually already permitted for as an assembly occupation. And so by definition, if you have an assembly occupation, why should you have to get prior approval for assembling in the space that's been constructed for exactly that purpose? And the great example is because it does talk about religious institutions. It's exactly what that's exactly the nature of a religious institution. So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and going back to my previous example, if there was a desire to protest something that was happening with city government, it is probably not in that organization's organization's best interest to be the person to say yes or no, you may or may not protest us. So it's really just kind of trying to step back from that
And the
eventuality.
specific example that you just gave recently, what really gave me heartburn is, wait, so you're saying I have to issue a public permit for people to protest at a city council meeting when we're already have advertised public assembly? Oh, God. It just, you understand, the complexity of this is a little on the challenging side.
Yes, so, and you'll see you'll see when we kind of go through some of the more slides why we're including it with this is that it's in all of the same sections that special events are in. So as we kind of open up the different sections and make edits to special events, this was a good opportunity to kind of clean that up. So another section that we'll have to change will be the zoning matrix. We're still having conversations about whether or not community events should be included in the zoning matrix at all. If the discussion ends with we should include it in the matrix, then we'll still need to change the seasonal and special events to community events, because that's the term that we have to find. If we decide to take that out, then we'll still need to memorialize that change somehow. And again, public assembly directly above that will just come out entirely. As you can see, seasonal and special events are listed as a limited use in all of these zones. And so a limited use, as we've already discussed, it's allowed in the zone, but with certain conditions. So this is what the limited use section says in all of the different zoning categories. As you can see, the limited use requirement for seasonal and special events down there at the bottom, number 4, is the requirement for a temporary use permit. So you go to the zoning matrix, it's allowed, but you have to go to the temporary use section to actually find out what the conditions are for you to have that event. We're still kind of having discussions about whether or not these should remain temporary use, or whether or not we should create its own special type of miscellaneous permit. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. Mobile sales and concessions will need a couple of amendments, so that are just the one, so it says in mobile sales and concessions down there on B, it says only permitted during special community events. So we would take out the word special and just permitted community events are when mobile sales and concessions would be allowed. And again, we would just remove public assembly from the limited use requirements. So as you saw in the previous slide, the zoning matrix and the limited use conditions direct people to our miscellaneous permit section, which is 10.4I-1 is temporary use. The very first one on there is seasonal and special events. Again, we're still kind of having conversations about whether or not we'll just rename that section as community events, or if we'll create a new type of permit down there at the bottom, 10.4I-5, community events. That one doesn't exist yet, which that would be what we would be creating. There is quite a bit more work associated with creating a whole new permit section rather than just kind of amending what's there. But with creating a whole new section, there's an opportunity to get into more of the detailed reasons of what we're permitting and why we're permitting it. We can also get down easier with some of the more finer details like fees and fee waivers and insurance requirements. None of those things are currently in this portion of the code, and so we would just have a whole flushed out piece where if you want to have a community event, you can just go to the miscellaneous permit and it's going to list everything that you need to go through that permitting process. Also in this one, another kind of unrelated change or unrelated change that we want to make, but just because we'll have the temporary use section open, if you will, is that another type of temporary use that we permit is for temporary buildings. And right now, that section does not allow for construction trailers, which is a pretty common practice for development. As they're developing, they have a construction trailer for them to lock up their materials and their tools at night. And it just reduces theft, and it helps them not have to reset up every day. It's pretty standard practice, so we're hoping to make a couple changes to that section to make it so that construction trailers are also allowed as a temporary building. So these are some of the other changes that we made that aren't necessarily under this purview, but will kind of help streamline the whole thing. Ordinance 142 was adopted in 2005. It directly addresses special events. It's pretty short and brief. It has not been updated recently and does not look like it's the process that's being implemented. Most of what this particular ordinance says is that a lot of the review and authorization comes from the city clerk and the mayor, which doesn't necessarily, seems a little bit higher than it needs to go for these types of things. And so we would be, and then accordingly, section 8(1)(a)(4) is a section of the Liberty Lake Municipal Code that addresses special events. It codifies ordinance 142. We would be looking to just repeal both of those so that all of the special event standards live in the development code in that one section. The permitting process as it functions today is very confusing for staff and for applicants. There are multiple points of contact, there are multiple individual permits that are pulled. So what we're looking to do is have one point of contact, one person that manages the application all the way through the process. They're the ones that are gonna make sure that all the documentation has been received. They're gonna make sure that all of the individual reviewers have checked off that it's okay to go. But right now, we kind of have all different pieces, kind of looking at different sections of it and there's not really one point person. We're also hoping that we can integrate we'll update the application form and then integrate that into our online permitting system. So hopefully people can just go online and do most of the data entry and most of that on their own time without having, right now we require a paper permit. And it's just kind of a modernization and it makes things easier for everybody. Another discussion that we need to have is about the fee structure and how we need to take a look at cost recovery and how we're assessing and or waiving fees and make sure that there's a very clear process for what fees apply, what does it cost to have this here, and what makes you eligible to not have to pay those fees. Right now, it's a little bit vague. So, so I put questions, comments, and suggestions because one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about all of this is because some of the people here have used this process and you guys are the ones that are out with your ear to the ground, talking to people. If you guys have heard things or if there's suggestions to how we can make this process more user-friendly, we're at a really good point in the updating process to make those changes and incorporate anything that you guys may have. So I really am genuinely looking for any kind of feedback or suggestions, or if you guys have any questions.
This stuff's complicated, isn't it?
More so than it needs to be. Yes.
And I think that as Amy pointed out in the beginning, what's happened is that we've added different things to our code, and we've made different changes that have made it super confusing because just tacking on this here and this there, and all of a sudden it's a mishmash of things that really needs to be streamlined. And our intent with all of this is to streamline not just the code, but the process and simplify it for our users. We love events in this community, but they do need to be permitted. We do need to know what's going on and make sure that our emergency service providers are aware of them. We have to make sure there's adequate restroom facilities for any given special event, that there's, if they have tents that are so large, it has to be, make sure that it's meeting snow loads, wind loads, those sorts of things. It's not going to collapse on people. I mean, there are safety considerations with this. Part of the permitting process enables us to notify all the emergency service providers. Part of the permitting process makes sure that we know that if you're having one event here and somebody's having an event here, we don't have our resources spread so thin that we can't serve the public. And so there's a lot of reasons why we have to do this, but we're committed to the fact that we can do it a heck of a lot better.
Well, I understand why you have to do it, but I mean, just I think considerations would be, although I haven't seen this, but if there's going to be a big political rally,
Right.
you know, that would be some kind of special event that could not necessarily a protest per se, but
Right. I like events as opposed to, the public assembly
Right.
just clouds the issue. That's why we're taking it out.
Yeah.
We feel like we can deal with these things through event permits. And so that's all, but it actually, believe it or not, really, the public assembly thing really muddies the water.
For myself, I would say that this proposal excites me and scares me at the same time. As someone that works for the nonprofits in here and dealing with the city and getting permitting, you guys do the best job you can, we try and play along as well as we can, but if the efficiencies you put into place in order to simplify things cost us more money, and we have very limited resources right now, we have very few volunteers to put these things through, and just speaking from someone that's part of that, I would love to work with the city to bring something that makes it streamlined, but I don't want to create a bigger government that's going to make this impossible for us to pull off. But I would say that beginning in 2023, the process has been great. The communication's been amazing. You can tell that you guys are trying to work on things. For me personally, not as a planning commissioner member, I appreciate that. And we're willing to work with that, but we just gotta make sure we're not creating this.
So one of the things on on the application that makes it difficult is it says, fee waivers on a case-by-case basis. And that's one of the things that I'd like to see not be the case. I'd like to see it be very clear when and what fees apply and don't apply. We've kind of taken the stance that if it's a city-sponsored event, meaning our logo is on it, we're actively participating in the planning and the implementation of it, that we waive the fees, because that's really an extension of our recreation department. And then if it's a 501c3, then we waive everything but the technology fee. If it's a 501c3, then it's a community partner essentially acting as our recreation department. And so we want to make it easy, but we still have to make sure that we're recouping the cost that it takes for us to issue those permits and do the reviews. So that would be the technology and processing fee, which is, that's $40.
Oh, I get that. I just think, we took an approach this year, at least for like the yard sale, for example. We started advertising for our local hotels. You got people coming from Montana for this yard sale this weekend. Check out our local hotels. That only helps the city. Right? And so there's got to be an offset there to making sure we're working together as a partnership to do that kind of stuff. We are 501(c), but we're trying to acknowledge that and obviously get some lodging tax revenue too.
And again, just to reinforce Amy's points, more than anything else, we want to codify the basis for it, and it's just as a public administrator, it's very, very difficult when we have these gray areas that don't provide any standards for when it applies and when it does not apply. We defer to the mayor on those, but we're getting to be large enough that it's challenging to defer to the mayor on each and every one.
Sure. And there's gonna be events going every weekend this summer, I'm sure.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I can see where you guys are faced with that.
For me, I have some reservations about not requiring permits, even for things like protests. I look at what happened in the city of Spokane, and you got homeless camping on this doorstep of the city council as a protest. That, I think anything, any event, any circumstance that affects the citizenry of our city should require a permit. And I think that's a really important issue in this day and age, that we control what's going on in our city. I worry that we have a lot of mob mentality in our culture these days, and that concerns me. Even if it's just people marching, if they're in the street, obviously that's going to require law enforcement. Obviously that's going to inhibit traffic. Even if they're walking on the sidewalks, that's going to be an inhibition, because a lot of people in their golf carts are on the sidewalks, not in the street. So I would be very concerned about not requiring permits for certain events.
I completely see where you're coming from, Joe. Lisa, I think you made a great point about protest against city council, I don't think we need to look at the intent of the protest. Business or business, and so if we approach it that way, we would have that same approach and everybody would be treated equally regardless if they like city council or they hate city council. I mean, therefore, it would eliminate that need.
Can you help me understand again, the community events and the special events, are you blending those together? Are you keeping them separate? Are you clarifying the difference between the two? And if so, how are you hoping to clarify those?
So right now, what I'm hoping to do is make them one. Right now, seasonal and special events is the term that we use in the zoning matrix and the limited use sections, but it's not a defined term. And then community events is a defined term, but it's not the one that's being used.
Okay.
So since we already have community events in the definition section, I'd like to use that as the term and then replace seasonal events throughout the code and use that as the term.
Okay.
But expand the definition of community events.
Yes.
Because right now, it appears to be only a more limited subset of all community and special events.
And I guess we'd have to consider whether it's taking place on private property versus city property.
Well, and that's exactly the point. The point is that even if it's on private property, if there's assembly going on that is outside the norm of that, of what the use is, a grand opening event where you're going to have barbecues and under awnings that maybe I'm sorry,
That's true.
I'm speaking to a very specific event that happened, but those are the types of things that those are the types of things that we have to look at. What are you doing? Where are you doing it? Is it gonna be safe? If you have a barbecue under the canopy and you don't have enough of a clear zone, that may be a concern. And when we're inviting the public to attend this, we have a public safety consideration that needs to be.
I agree.
But I just saw that Hub Sports is gonna be expanding quite a bit. So if they were to have some type of athletic tournament, they require to be permitted?
So no, I would say not. And the reason why I would say not is because what they're doing is they're getting a building permit for exactly that purpose. They're going through the secret process right now. They're going to, the issues related to traffic are going to be considered as part of that. So they're going through the process of permitting that as not a temporary use, but as a permanent use. You gotta keep in mind the special event, so a special event, a community event, whatever you call it, it's a one-time defined, this is something that's gonna happen in this limited time.
That's a normal course of business. That's what they do.
Exactly.
Is that also true of the ball fields at the high school? Are those governed by Central Valley School District, or do we have any say in that?
So that is Central Valley School District, again, those are areas, the whole stadium, the stadiums were permitted and designed for use for public assembly. It is by the nature of its use that it's outright allowed. It's only,
Okay,
right?
that makes sense, that makes sense.
So just help me out here, because I think, say a church that every Sunday has 3 services. Except on Easter and Christmas, they have 6 services. It's still what they're designed to do, right?
That is
That's,
correct.
and so we wouldn't say, just because it's Easter Sunday, you have 6 services.
No, but what I would say is that
But if they brought in, what I was going to say, but if they brought in and said, okay, all the churches of my nature in the Northwest, we're having this huge gathering in Liberty Lake of all these churches for something, then we might say that should have a permit, because it's not the normal function of that church and property to bring in, say, 5,000 people to this. and
That's
stuff.
correct, and again, they wouldn't be able to assemble in the church in all likelihood, so it would spill out into the parking lot. What I was gonna say is the example would be, you have churches, my church does it also, where we sponsor a harvest festival. during Halloween, right? And so when you're having a,
All the kids know it's Halloween.
I'm sorry?
All of the kids who come know it's really Halloween.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. We do trunk or treat, right? But my point is that is a special event, when you all of a sudden open up your parking lot to a festival. That's a special event, that's not what the church was designed to do, and it really is outside of the facility. Yes.
Two questions. One question would be, neighborhood block parties. Special event or just depends on how big it is or?
Because that would impact the right of way, and it would impact city services, because it would impact our ability to access those properties, that would require one, because they would have to close down the street.
Even if it's on private property, say Legacy Ridge does one, I mean, it's not public street, so maybe that's something we have to consider.
Again, I would look at that as what are they doing? Are police and fire going to be able to respond if there's an emergency? Are there going to be adequate bathroom facilities? Are there, I would have to look at it, but likely the answer to that would be yes, that would require a special event permit.
And enforcement and penalty?
That's the sticky wicket.
So the way our enforcement reads is, and it's challenging, code enforcement is challenging. So we issue a letter of infraction, indicate that, they have 14 days to bring it into compliance. If they don't comply, then we can ask the police department to issue them a civil infraction. Civil infraction is $250 a day for each and every day that the offense continues to occur after that 14-day period. So
It's one night,
I know, that's my point.
Yeah.
My point is that's, so at the end of the day, yes, it's,
Good luck.
It would likely be one of those things where if it was a reoccurring issue, then we would be able to address it. But
Exactly.
then there's just people that there's always, I mean, even with building permits, we have people that build things that needed a permit that they just didn't get a permit. And if nobody finds out and there's nothing ever that goes sideways, then you've got a freebie. Unfortunately.
until you try and sell your house and didn't get a permit for that finished basement.
that's another situation.
That's, yeah.
That becomes a sticker.
That's grandfather. Oh, just can't use that word.
I think the correct term is grand person. I truly think we're going to, as a city, ignore the block parties. I mean, you can say all day long you want to permit them, but you can't control them. You probably won't even know a lot of them happen.
And that really is.
And even though they may impact everything you want to permit for, I think of our block, we have a cul-de-sac at the end and,
Likewise.
is there bathroom facilities? Well, there's
There's somebody's
a
house.
few dozen houses up and down the street that people use. Are we blocking anything? Well, if a lawn chair out in the middle of the cul-de-sac is blocking something, I guess you could argue we're blocking it, but it's not, so it's really hard to,
Well, the other side of that.
it's one of those ones where we probably don't want to get, we gotta figure that out so that we're not calling a bunch of people
Well, so.
to task because they
I
didn't get a
would say that
permit.
those usually have a limited guest list. They're not usually posted on Facebook for everyone in the city to come. It's not
No, it's just,
necessarily,
it's a dozen homes or.
it's not open to the
Yeah.
general public.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I just don't want it to be where we are
Well,
telling people that you did wrong. Shame on
well,
you.
so that's the other thing I'm gonna say, and I will say this again, and we are complaint-driven code enforcement. We don't have the staffing to be proactive. And by the way, nobody likes it when your community becomes proactive. It sounds like a really great idea to do proactive code enforcement until, hey, wait, if you're gonna enforce on this, people start going out there and measuring grass with
Calipers.
Mhm.
Look at it, the HOA that are proactive code enforcement. Not well liked.
It's a very good, and it's very staff intensive for what is generally tends to be not a very good return on your investment.
So our church has trunk or treat, and they have a 3-on-3 tournament, and they're having this summer, later this summer, a big kids thing.
But vacation Bible school.
Right. And it, because of the traffic and everything, is that something that, and I'm not saying that you go afterwards, but maybe even because it happens every year, I don't think that a letter from the city suggesting or stating the need for some kind of a permit would be out of place. I mean, when I was on the board, I made sure that we had insurance, that we followed up with that, because nobody's trying to do anything malicious, nobody's trying to get away with anything, it was just, it would have been, and we were a good legacy, so a friend of mine owns Scanabel, and we've got a lot behind them, and they asked me if I would approach the owners and ask if we could use their lot for our kids in the summer. And I said I would, but only after I call our insurance to make sure that the liability would be covered so that I could go there. And again, that was kind of foreign to somebody who has a wonderful degree in theology, but not in code enforcement. So in something like that, it almost would be, I mean, like you said, nobody wants to come in with well, some people want to, they're on the HOA board, but normally, most people don't want to be proactive.
I think the biggest challenge is gonna be definitional.
But I think that, but I do think, like that 3-on-3 tournament, et cetera, it has all of those things, I mean, it does, it gets in the way of traffic, the police are there, I mean, it's in their lot as well, but if that hasn't been permitted, my question is, should it be? And if it should be, then maybe just a kind letter suggesting that would be ordered.
And I think that you're right, and I think that, and by the way, that's how we do code enforcement. We try and resolve things at the lowest possible level. A phone call, a well-placed phone call, addresses probably 80% of what we have to deal with. And, just friendly reminders, hey, maybe we didn't know this, but there's reasons why we should be looking at that for permitting purposes. Amongst other things would be like the number of restroom facilities, because there is code related to, state code related to how many porta johns you need to have for X number of population and whatnot. That's part of what we do if you're gonna have food and beverages, those sorts of things, just, it's a way to as much protect as anything. We will have insurance requirements also, because again, the interest is protecting the public, but it also protects our for-profits and not-for-profits that are holding the events because you're right, somebody who runs a hardware store probably doesn't have a lot of thought about what potential risks are associated with this one special event for a grand opening.
Yes, I think that removing the risk or mitigating the risk for the sponsoring entity is certainly part of that. And again, I think that a well-timed preemptive letter would probably, in most cases, hardware store, church, whatever, would be well received.
Yeah, I think Jim made a good point. It comes out of definition. I think it comes down to approach, Lisa, to your point, that this is a partnership. Let's figure this out together, because legacy wants to be protected, the Kiwanis wants to be protected. If we do everything correctly, we're good, right? Unless we don't know, I mean, what we're doing. I mean, we put on a sale every year, and people come and we go home. It's no idea what could happen in the meantime.
Yeah.
This could also be written right into our criteria that we have. I'm gonna call it a publication, whether it's the splash or whatever it is, but we require the city to put out on an annual basis or something. Here's a list of community type things that people would be doing that require permitting through the city. Because I don't know that that's a quick, gee, I'm having a block party, you might need to go get a permit.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that's quick, and a well-placed letter, you have to have some insight that somebody's gonna be doing something ahead of time, so you can send that letter.
And of course,
And so-
it's already overwhelmed.
Yeah, and so maybe the criteria when we're done here is that we do have a annual, here's your list of things you guys out there that we would, and maybe a basis for why we want permits, you know?
That's one of the, Amy talked about creating a new section as opposed to trying to tweak the language that already exists under temporary use permits. That's one of the arguments for why we should maybe create a new section, because we can really be much more intentional about, and better communicate the purpose of why we're doing it.
The other thing that's been mentioned, is with respect to any offense. You know, I think you almost have to be somewhat intentional or clear as to the sponsor of the event and who is legally liable if something, if there's an issue. Because I don't think you want the city of Liberty Lake to be providing permits, but then somehow being legally liable for something that goes wrong because we provided a permit.
Right, and that's, so the reality is that we do have insurance requirements, and we will have insurance requirements, and even if it's happening on private property because we permit it, or particularly because so examples, I'll give you a great example. Some example would be you're holding an event at the community farm in River District, which has no parking. And so the event goers are gonna be parking at Orchard Park, the city's park. And oh, by the way, they're gonna be crossing the street. And so even when we permit that, we're gonna want the community farm to have insurance that covers that. And it names the city as an additional named insured, because if something happens, if there's, God forbid, that a child is hit crossing the street, getting to the event or whatever, that we need to have those protections, and that's protecting all of the citizens.
All of it's protected.
I agree.
We do that currently, if you wanna just go reserve one of the covered areas at our parks, right? I mean, I think you're required to have an insurance thing, that's what the application says, and that's what we've done in the past, you know?
Thank you for some really robust
Kind of an easy
conversation.
one.
It is, this is maybe one of the more complicated things that we're doing this time around.
Before you close up, I mean, just take an example, you're having a birthday party or graduation party at one of the pavilions. You get a permit, but is the permit holder going to have any kind of insurance for that type of an event?
You have to have it, to go through the city to reserve that pavilion, they require you to have an insurance thing, at least that's what we did. It's on that permit process, it's on that.
I believe if you're just renting a shelter, for a small event, I can't confirm that, actually, Tate is the one that does the park
I mean,
reservations.
if you reserve a shelter for a birthday party, I don't think there's going to be anybody that's going to get any kind
No,
of, or
I
a
just.
sponsor that's gonna.
And again, those aren't open to the general public, those have a limited guest list,
Okay,
so.
yeah,
So
yeah.
for our permitting purposes, and it would have a very limited impact on city services, because you're not gonna have closing down streets, you're
Using the
not.
park for what a park should be used for.
Exactly.
Those are the smaller
We
things.
rented one, it's been a couple of years back now, but we got insurance for it, 'cause that's what we had to do to process the application.
Yeah, and this is actually excellent example of why the process is so difficult, is because Tate does a lot of the park reservations. And so if you reserve a pavilion and then you're also having an event in the park, then you've got like 5 different departments and nobody really knows what the other one's doing. So when you have a small event at the pavilion, Tate handles it. If you have a big process in the park, then that's when I get involved, and that's when traffic control and our engineering department gets involved. So
But it also when Jen and her crew get involved.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of cooks in the kitchen, and, we're just trying to streamline that.
Amy, what's next for this? So what's our next workshop going to look like? Are we going to?
Oh, and so the next workshop, I actually had to tone down my presentation so that I wasn't getting, I start at the higher level and kind of get down. So the next one, I'm hoping that I'm gonna have actual language for you guys to look at, some proposed changes to the definitions. We'll have a clearer idea, I think, of where we want to go with whether or not we're gonna leave it as a limited use in the matrix and a temporary use, or if we're gonna create this whole new code section. If we are going to create a whole new code section, I'm hoping that I will have more language for you guys to look at with that. So I'm hoping to have some, and right now I have some outlines of what that language should look like, but I haven't had an opportunity to vet it with all the different staff. So I want to make sure that staff is on board before I bring you guys something that then our Parks Department is going to say, this doesn't work for us.
Why I ask, because I'm curious if you, like Tim's got some experience obviously with this process. I don't have any experience with it. One way to look at a process and figure out how to improve that process is to go through that process. Are we beyond that of taking the process that exists today? Or is that something you guys are doing outside of our commission, the planning commission here, kind of going through that process and saying, here's what we want to go work on? Okay, and you probably are, because I've never gone through that process. And one of the thoughts is if either I go look for it or you provide it to us, is what does that application look like today? I don't even know what it looks like. I've never done it.
It is about 7 pages. It has a lot of what I would call extra information on there, and does not ask all of the right questions.
Do you guys think that would be useful for us to get a copy of that, so we can kind of see what we're.
I'd be happy, I would love it if I could get some feedback on the application.
Would you include somebody like Tim as far as that vetting process before it comes to us? Somebody who's, so you're looking at other internal stakeholders, Tim is, and others are external stakeholders who actually have to go through with it. Did you plan on including Tim and or his ilk in that early review process? I think it might save some time and headaches.
Well, that's one of the things I'm doing here, is hoping that I can get you guys to kind of give me that outside feedback.
But Tim is more.
Are you volunteering for something again?
Joe is more.
So I think giving us that opportunity to at least look at it so that we can familiarize ourselves with what it is.
I would love to.
This is
send
an
you guys-
example, I mean, for permitting processes, I mean, if the city's process is 7 pages long, it took me 2 pages to get a liquor permit for the beer garden at Barefoot, and it's 2 pages long. It's very concise, very specific, and,
But the beer garden is also permitted by some other department in the state.
well, but I'm just saying it's simplified. It's like, it took me 10 minutes to fill out.
And people are very pro beer gardens. We want to simplify that.
But yes, so we can,
Have a distribution to us, so kind of what we have today, and,
Yeah.
because I'm not,
Everything's
I'm
okay.
in our government, I don't know.
Couple of other things come to mind. This is maybe a little bit off subject, but you know, the city of Spokane is having issues with respect to parks and having posted hours when parks are open, and then enforcement for people in the parks after hours causing vandalism, camping out, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit maybe off subject of what you're doing with respect to events, but I don't know if the city of Liberty Lake has those.
so the answer is yes, we do have those.
Yeah, okay.
We have those rules in place, we do enforce them, we just, the city council just passed the camping ordinance.
Yeah, okay.
That, we had it before, but it's strengthened.
Then the other thing I would say is, what do other cities do with respect to this permit permitting for these types of things?
So usually,
And you reached out to other,
I have lots and lots and lots of research of
Okay.
different communities and how they do it. There's lots of different ways that you can break down when permits are required. Some of them have it based on the anticipated population, like the anticipated participants. So you're gonna have, if you are anticipating between 50 and 100 people,
it's one thing.
it's this, if you're, so it really is just. Yeah, there's lots of different ways. And a
Okay.
lot of it is based on the community itself. There's some of them that, you know, they have a big motocross thing, and so they have lots of events of that. It's really community specific,
Gotcha.
but there's lots of different ways that people go about this.
Okay.
so my takeaway from this is that, and I'm gonna ask Amy to do this tomorrow, if you could send out to the planning commission the existing permit application.
Thank you.
She is working on revisions to that, some of which are going to depend upon where we go with this. And she's been going through a vetting process with other departments. We have some meetings scheduled for that coming up. After we've maybe vetted, yes, we'd love to get Tim's feedback if he's open to it, but we can actually send out what the draft looks like and ask all of you to really weigh in and give some consideration.
Is something confusing? Am I missing something? I
Right.
would love feedback.
Tana's been awesome, having a lot of the food permits for the food trucks coming up. Tana's been incredible, and guess what? When these guys want to come and sell stuff, they're gonna follow the process. So we just need to make sure it's concise. I have no concerns about that whatsoever, but this year we've had more permitting than we've ever had, and still moving forward. So, thanks, Tate.
Okay, very good.
So we're on to the secretary's report. First of all, I want to introduce Charlie Jenks. Charlie is on the docket for Tuesday to be appointed as our second adjunct position. And Charlie comes with a wealth of experience. Charlie, do you want to kind of share your background a little bit with the?
Oh, sure.
Planning commission?
I get to speak?
Yeah, we'd love you to speak.
Shall I go to the podium? Already got one?
Just make sure it's on.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's on.
The light should be on.
Well, I'll just begin from the floor. Name is Charlie Jenks. Moved from, I lived in Hawaii for about 32 years on the island of Maui. And I went to Maui with my, thank you. Went to Maui with my then father-in-law to build some homes on the south side in Wailea Resort. Did that and decided to stay, had a son on Maui. And decided to stay, went back into the public sector. I went to work as a deputy director of public works for a short period of time, and then was made the director of public works for two mayors, Mayor Linda Lingle, the first woman mayor of Maui County, was a terrific leader, a really good manager. And then she left, served 2 terms, and I stayed on for the next mayor, Kim Wapana. And then I decided after 10 years in the public sector that I had quite enough. I decided I'm gonna go back out into the private sector, went back out and ended up managing some fairly significant projects on Maui, getting into some partnerships, doing some light industrial, commercial and residential development on the island. And then got to the point where I decided time to retire and travel, and traveling from Hawaii is impossible. If you want to go anywhere, it's a 5-hour plane ride to the West Coast. By the time you get off of that plane, you're angry, dirty, and hungry. So decided, let's go to the Northwest. And we bought a house in Legacy Ridge in 2015. And then in 2018, moved into that house after I renovated that. And decided that it was time for me to get back into doing something that I could use my expertise on. I have a background in urban design and planning and engineering and architecture. So with those 4 skill sets, I think I can bring something to the table. I was an ex-official member of the Maui Planning Commission during my tenure as a deputy and director of public works. I sat on the State Land Use Commission as the at-large member for the governor, Linda Lingle. She was the mayor of Maui County, then was elected the governor of the state of Hawaii for 2 terms. And so I served on the State Land Use Commission, which was a really interesting body. Hawaii has a multi-tier entitlement process, which is very difficult, very time consuming and very expensive. It took me 8 years, by example, to get the zone change done before Maui County Council, 8 years. By that time, we had to recapitalize the project, lost some partners, gained some new partners. It's a very expensive place to do business and very difficult, but nevertheless, I'm interested in serving on the planning commission and helping however I can, bringing my expertise to the table and lending something to the decision-making process. So hopefully, on the 20th, they'll say yes, and then I can sit in as needed and help you folks. Thank you.
Good.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jared.
Well,
There you go.
Do you have any property for rent left in Maui? Just.
No, I wish I did.
Want to travel the world, you're already in Maui.
The year we left, which was in 2018, my wife is still selling real estate on Maui. She goes back and forth. And it's the year we left, the median single-family sales price was nearly $1 million. So it's virtually impossible for the local folks to either buy or rent. It's a very, very difficult place. That doesn't happen here. Thank you.
So the only other thing I wanted to just share with you, and I know that most of you are on the notify me list, so you're getting these notices of applications and whatnot. The permit volume is quite intensive right now. So we have right now over 1,000 active permits in the city of Lily Lake. Maybe issued 230 new permits. We have 133 permits that are currently in review.
I've got a lot of roofs.
Yeah, we have, right now, I think we have almost 700 permits that are re-roof siding and
Yes.
that sort of thing. So, but still, these all require inspections and they all have to be cleansed. Our active permits, we got 13 new commercial with 15 TIs. We have 8 pending commercial permits under review. We have 176 active new home permits. We have 7 multifamily buildings with 288 units. We're going to have some more coming in shortly. It's moving very rapidly. It is quite intensive right now in my department, and I have a great crew. They work very hard, and the one thing that I hope that you will grant us a little grace. I hope the community will grant us a little grace, because with this kind of volume, it takes a bit of time to we are not we have worked very hard to establish our reputation as being easy to work with. And it's at this point and under this volume, it's not that we're not easy to work with. It takes a little longer for us for people to get through the permit process. So I thought it was worthwhile to share that with all of you.
Thank you.
Other than that, I've got nothing. Commissioner reports.
Anybody have any commissioner reports? I do. My wife and I just completed the Liberty Lake Academy. 7 weeks of an hour and a half each week of presenters that talk to us about how the city was formed, what kind of government it is, all about revenue, expenses, the police department, fire, all of that, utilities, waste, sewage, everything. It was extremely well done and well presented. Lisa did an excellent job in talking about planning and zoning, and it was well worth it. The next one is probably going to be in the fall. I urge you, don't hesitate to sign up for it. It's free. It is a commitment
for 7 weeks, but it's worth every minute. It went an hour and a half. We went over an hour and a half almost every night and nobody wanted to leave. It was so interesting and everybody that presented was so well prepared and so enthusiastic about what they do. It really blew us away. It really was well done.
Citizen comments.
Do we have any citizens online?
Tom Solberg was on for a while, but I don't see him anymore. Tom, are you there? I guess not. Charlie, do you have any words?
Yes.
Okay.
I move to adjourn.
In favor?
Aye.
Adjourn.
Who was the second? Okay. The duo, you guys are.
That kicks me every time.
You remember?
The reaction tab didn't ever open, so my hand was up, but I don't think you ever saw it. It's no problem because all the other commissioners answered all the questions and all of their comments were excellent. I just want to let you know, just in case it's a technical issue.
Technical issue. Sorry to hear that, and because I could barely understand what you were saying, DG, even that time, maybe can you send me an email?
Yes.
To explain what the technical issue was that you were experiencing.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Lisa?
Yes.
Pull you off topic question. Pull you off topic.
Katie was asking you about this, parcel. That was just, that little guy right there.